In this video, we're going to talk about creative real estate investing, how we can get a deal under contract for little to no money down and be able to sell that contract or sell that property and make a nice profit. Hi, I'm Jonathan Otero. I'm the owner of J&J Management Group, and we buy houses Seminole. And I know you're probably wondering, Jonathan, where have you been? I haven't been on YouTube for a while. I've been really busy getting a lot of deals under contract and working on some of these projects. As a matter of fact, in this video, we're going to take a look at one of those projects that I just worked on, that I just closed on, actually in Largo, Florida. I'm going to go through the numbers. I got my little cheat sheet here to keep me honest with the dates and the numbers. And we're going to talk about the strategies that I used to get that deal under contract, what I did during the contract, and what I did to sell the contract and make my profit. So let's dive into that and let's talk about some creative real estate investing strategies. Before we get into the numbers of the Largo property and the project and how that worked out, I want to talk to you about some terms. So let's establish what those terms are and what they mean so you can understand when I say those throughout the rest of the video. So the first strategy that I used on this project is what we call subject to. If you've never heard that term before, that is one of the methods that we use when we want to get a property under contract for little to no money down. Subject to is where we take over the existing loans, or we take over a property subject to the existing liens that are on the property there. If you take a look at your HUD statement in your state, in the state of Florida where I'm in, it's line item 503 to 507. There's a whole section in the federal HUD settlement statement that shows where you would take over the liens subject to. So say, for example, you were taking over a mortgage of $100,000. Well, when you took over that mortgage subject to, the title company would put that $100,000 in the payoff in one of those line items. Usually it's line item 503, depending how many payoffs they are or how many liens you're taking over. Let's just say it's one to keep things simple. So it would go in line item 503. As a matter of fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you an example of that right now. You're seeing on your screen on the project that we did where the title company put in the loan, and you can see there it's $99,000 and change that we took over. And that was what we were now responsible for. So what's very important to understand is this: when you're taking over a project or a property subject to, you as the new owner of the property are going on title. Your name or your entity is going to be the owner of the property on the deed. So there's two things from a property. You always have the deed, okay? And then you have the lien or the loan. Okay? So what we actually do is we get on the deed. When we close with the title company, our entity, our LLC or our name or our business or whatever it is now the owner of the property through the deed. And that gets recorded in public record, okay? But the loan or the liens on the property stay in place, and they stay in the name of the old seller. Because you can't assume any loans. There's no such thing as assumable loans anymore, so you can't actually put your name on the loan, but you can take over that loan and make the payments to it and continue to make the payments. Now, the tricky part when it comes to subject to, there is one thing that if the lender, in this particular case, for my case study, for my project, it was U.S. Bank. But any lender, Wells Fargo or whoever it is, any mortgage company, if they find out that there was a sale of property, there is a clause in the loan that says that they can call the loan due. It's called the due on sale clause. If they do find out that there is a sale on the property, they can call that loan due, and usually they give you 30 to 45 days to pay it all off. But as investors, the whole reason why we're employing this subject to strategy is because we want to be able to get into the property for little to no money down, or as cheap as possible as we can. So you want to make sure that you're aware and you understand that when you're taking over a property subject to, you become the owner of record through the deed, and you take over the mortgage payments or the lien payments for that property. But the lien holder, the lender or the bank, if they do find out a sale is made on the property, they can call the loan due. So buyer beware. Just make sure you understand the risks that are involved with that, and make sure you take that into consideration when you're looking to take over a property subject to. But what we did on this particular property, we took over those loans, we took over those mortgages, and then we're going to get into how we sold it. But that's subject to, where you get on the deed and you take over the payments. That's pretty much it in a nutshell. Now, let's also talk about another creative term, what we call wholesaling. Wholesale. Okay? So to enter the project and to enter the property, we took it over subject to, okay? But to sell the property, we did a wholesale deal. So what does wholesale mean? Wholesale is where you have a deal under contract with a seller, okay? And then you sell that contract. While under contract with the seller, you go and find another buyer, okay? And for the purposes of this conversation, and it actually worked out pretty similar to this on my deal, we got the deal under contract for $100,000, okay? And while we were under contract with the seller, we went and found another buyer for $120,000. They didn't fix anything, didn't do anything to the property. All we did was clean it up, get some of the old stuff that was out of there, and cleaned up the property. We sold our interest in the property, the contract that we had, we sold it to the new buyer, and the difference between $100,000 and $120,000 after closing costs and commission was our profit. So that is called a wholesale deal. And that is, like I said, where you get a property under contract with a seller. You then go find another buyer to sell that property to while under contract, and you close with that new buyer. The difference between what you have it under contract for and what you sell it to the new buyer to, that's going to be your profit in the middle. That's the money that you make that's in the middle there. With a wholesale deal, a lot of people know wholesale because, or they've heard that term before, because it's a good way for real estate investors, new real estate investors who don't have that much money when they're getting started, to get into the business and start getting into real estate and doing some deals. They can get a deal under contract. They can then sell their interest in that contract to someone else and make the money in the middle. And then you do a couple of those, you start to create a nice nest egg, and then you can start doing traditional fix and flips, like what you see on TV. And some of the stuff that you've seen us do in the past as well on some of these videos. Wholesale is a very, very strategic and complex strategy to pull off. And I would argue that it's not really for new people just getting in. Wholesaling is a very advanced technique, in my opinion, because you got to be able to get the deal under contract first, which is the hardest thing to do. Then once you have it under contract, you then have to go find another buyer, and there's a lot of moving parts to all of that. You have to keep multiple people in place. Your title company has to understand what you're trying to do. It is a very advanced technique, but when you know how to do it, it is awesome, because you can get a property for very, very cheap, put very little money into it, and be able to make a lot of money without having to deal with the headaches of getting permits and dealing with contractors and quotes and proposals and going over budget, or having to deal with all those other things that come with security issues. You know, your house is empty at night. What happens if it gets broken into? So you don't have to deal with any of those stresses when you're doing a wholesale deal. So if you learn that advanced technique early on, great job on your part. And I would definitely suggest that you use wholesaling whenever you can. So now let's get into the details of my deal. Now that you understand what subject to and wholesale is, let's get into the details of the deal. So let's talk about the Largo flip. We got a property under contract in Largo, Florida. The seller had contacted us from our website back in September, middle of September, around that time. And we took a look at the property. We saw what we liked, what we didn't like. We did a whole visual inspection on it. Then what happened was, finally, after all the negotiations and back and forth, on October 1st, we got the deal under contract for $100,000. Okay, so October 1st, 2018, we get the deal under contract, $100,000 flat. Part of our negotiations and part of our back and forth, because we were getting a great deal at this time, we were going to be willing to pay not only for the closing costs for the seller, but we were also going to pay to help the seller move, because they were in a bad situation. They needed to get out quickly. The funds were low. They were very weak with their finances. They didn't even have enough money to move their stuff out. So we were going to help them move, and we were going to help them with their closing costs, because we got the purchase price where we needed it to be. As a matter of fact, just so you know, the negotiation started at $140,000. That's what the seller was asking for. Because of what we saw and because of our negotiating, we were able to knock it all the way down to $100,000. But we were willing to do this $100,000 deal with closing costs, with helping them move. We were going to close within 2 weeks. 2 to 3 weeks was what the closing date was set for. After we got the deal under contract, we dug right in. We started doing our due diligence. We did an inspection. We had our contractors out there giving us some prices on some bids on some of the scope of work of what we wanted to do, like flooring, painting, fixing the roof, fixing the fence, you know, landscaping stuff. So we got everything squared away. And on October 17th, just less than 3 weeks later, we were ready to close on this flip. And we were ready to get this project going right away. Well, what happened was on October 17th, the buyer went MIA. We sent her the closing documents because she was farther away. She couldn't come down to Orlando where the closing was going to take place. We did a mobile notary. No one showed up. The seller didn't show up. She went missing. All of a sudden, her cell phone is gone and all the other issues that come along with that. We couldn't find the seller. The money was wired to the title company. They had the money for the purchase price and the closing costs. We were set to go. And unfortunately, the closing didn't happen because the seller didn't show up and didn't sign and execute her side of the contract. So the deal was off the table. Couldn't find her anymore. Her cell phone was off, like I said. She was just gone, disappeared off the face of the planet. Didn't know what happened. So title company had to wire the funds back to us and we had to move on to the next project. Well, as luck would have it, I'm looking at my notes to make sure that I keep honest to it. All of a sudden, I'm getting dressed to get ready to do our next flip in Winter Haven, Florida. And I'm getting ready to go take pictures of that so we can list it on the MLS. And I get a phone call on December 15th from this seller for this property telling me, you know, whatever the story was, whatever the situation was, she went through it and now she was done and she wanted to continue with our sale. Great. Problem is, we had to start all over again with our due diligence because we had to make sure that we put an addendum to our contract. So we changed the closing date. And at that point, we already had our funds allocated in other projects. We thought this deal was off the table. So now we had to figure out, okay, well, how we're going to take over this property now because we allocated and earmarked funds for other things. So now we still know this is a great deal. We don't want to let this one go, but our resources were put into other projects. And I didn't want to purchase this property and have it sitting there until we were done with the other projects that we had going on. So we decided, you know what we're going to do? We're going to now take this over sub 2. And what we did was we took a look at how much was owed on the property. And at that time, the seller was behind 7 months on the mortgage. So now the bank is getting ready to start foreclosure proceedings. And so what we did was we knew that that was going on. Plus there was another lien on the property. She had a water treatment system that she didn't pay. And so that was that lien on the property as well. And that lien was getting ready to go up if she hadn't paid by a certain time. So what we decided to do is we decided, okay, we did our due diligence again. We got back into the property, saw that it was actually in worse condition than it was when we previously had saw it because now all the stuff that was in the house, she ransacked the house. It just looked like a mess. As a matter of fact, I'll show you some pictures of what the house looked like when we got it back under contract again back in December so you can see. Seeing some pictures now and you can see what's going on with that house and it was just a mess. So what we did was we took it over subject 2, okay, and let me show you what the numbers were. Because when we took it over subject 2, we had to take a look at what exactly the seller needed to get to walk away from the property so she can be fine transferring over the deed to us. We also had to pay off that water lien that I talked to you about. Plus we had contractually agreed to the seller that we were going to pay their closing costs. So let's take a look at the numbers, right? So since we took over the existing mortgage, which was now about to face foreclosure, we decided to take those pictures exactly how you saw them just now on the screen, and we decided to do a wholesale deal and look for another buyer while we were under contract. So we listed that house on the MLS because through our contracts, we're able to list our interest in the property and we can sell our interest on the property any way we deem fit, which in this case is listing on the MLS. So we listed on the MLS for $120,000. We had it under contract for $100,000 purchase price. And during that whole time, throughout the holidays and everything, we ended up finding a buyer. And on January 5th, 2019, we locked that buyer in with a $5,000 non-refundable deposit, and we sold the property to them for $120,000. And the closing date was set for February 8th. He needed 30 days later. It was actually an international buyer. He was buying a couple properties, and so he needed 30 days to close on the property. The only contingency was that the house had to be completely broom swept clean before he closed on the property. So all those pictures and what you saw, all that stuff and all that mess that you saw in those pictures, we had to get that cleaned out. That was the only contingency from the new buyer. But we had a contract in place with him for 120 grand with $5,000 down, non-refundable. Okay? So now, while this is taking place, these 30 days, while we're waiting for that, what we ended up doing was we cleaned the property up, okay, like I showed you. So that way when they did their inspections and they did their final walkthrough, everything was the way they wanted it and it looked great, okay? Looked better than it was in those pictures. So now we have to close with the new buyer by February 8th. And in the interim, the seller that we had under contract for $100,000, they wanted now to close quickly. They needed the money, they needed the cash right away. They had a lot of personal things going on in their life and they wanted to close right away. They could not wait till February 8th. Plus the house was in foreclosure. They just wanted to get rid of it. They just wanted to get this problem off their neck. So, okay. So when we took over that property on January 23rd, paid $2,075 for the water lien, okay? That's the water lien. We paid another $2,476.92 for closing costs, okay? That was the closing cost for our side and the seller side because we agreed to pay the closing costs. And then the seller needed to make some money out of this, and even though they were facing foreclosure, they knew they weren't going to get that much. So it was about to go into foreclosure, hadn't started yet. So we were able to put $437.51 into the seller's pocket because, you know, she was going to get more than that, but because she delayed the closing for whatever her reasons were back in October, now those mortgage payments had to get paid, more late fees, more interest charges. All that stuff sucked out her profit. And to be quite honest with you, since she didn't pay the mortgage for the last 8-9 months at that point, her profit was from not having to pay her mortgage. That money that she would have paid the bank went back in her pocket because she didn't pay it. That was her profit. So anyway, when you take a look at these three line items, this is to the seller, this was a total, we got into this house for a total of $4,989.43. That is how much it cost us to get into this property because we took it over subject to. We took over the existing mortgage and we now are responsible for that mortgage. So we got on the deed. So not bad. Back in October, we were going to get into this project for $100,000 plus closing costs. And in this particular case, now we got into the property for just under $5,000. So that's a pretty good deal. So now we own the property. We're the owners of the property as of January 23rd. Closed on the A side, we are now the owners of this property. We are on the deed, but we still have the mortgage in place and we're getting ready now to wait another 2 weeks to close. So it's January 23rd. And now on February 8th, we're going to close with the new buyer. So here's what we ended up doing. We do the B side of the closing with the new buyer and we sell the house to him for $120,000. So let's run through some of the numbers so you can see how that looked on the B side. So now we own the property. Okay. And now we're selling to him for $120,000. Okay. We also had to now pay off the mortgage. So the mortgage at that point had gone all the way up to $100,022.74. That was the payoff for the mortgage. So that goes straight to the mortgage company. Okay. Then we had to pay closing costs and commissions to the buyer's agent. So that total was $5,096. Out of that $5,000, like I said, maybe it was $3,000 and change commission to the buyer's agent. She got 3% commission, and then the rest of it was the closing costs that you normally would incur on a regular closing. So our profit total came out to a total profit of $14,852.67. Not bad. Not a bad profit for a property that we really didn't have to do too much to except for clean up. So when you take a look at these numbers and you take a look at the strategy that we employed here, the way we got to this 14,000 and change number was because A, we took the property over subject to, just for a little under $5,000, became the owner of the property. We took over the mortgage. And then 2 weeks after we did the A side closing and we became the owners, on February 8th, we did the B side closing, sold it and wholesaled our deal to a new buyer for $120,000. Then that's when the payoff, that's when the mortgage got paid off, the lien on that property, the last lien on that property got paid off with that $100,000. The $5,000 that we had to spend on closing costs and commissions came out of our profit as well. So we netted $14,852.67. That's how we took over the Largo house, subject to and wholesale. The subject to deal when we first acquired the property, and then we wholesaled that property to another investor buyer on the B side of the transaction. Very creative, very strategic, and it was a great way for us to get into a property, only own it for 2 weeks for less than $5,000, and be able to walk away 2 weeks later with a profit of $14,852. Not bad at all. Very excited. Now, if you guys follow me on Instagram and Facebook and you've seen some of my videos, you've been seeing kind of the progression of this. There's a lot of other little nuances that have been going on with this property that, I don't want to get into specifically on this video, but just to give you an idea, the closing was supposed to be set with this new buyer on February 8th, but they had some issues with their wire because it was sending an international wire. February 8th was a Friday, so since the wire didn't hit, we couldn't close until the following week. So we had to wait Saturday and Sunday and then to the following week, Monday, to be able to close. So technically this property didn't close until the following Monday. That's when the deal funded, but all the paperwork was already signed. We already knew that the money was going to be sent. We just technically had to close February 10th. February 11th instead of February 8th. So anyway, those are some of the little nuances. And also, we had some issues with the seller on the A side. Like I told you, they went missing for a couple of months. There was some personal issues that she was going through that also affected the deal. So there was a lot of moving parts to this, and there was a lot of issues that were going on. But we got it done because we were able to use these creative real estate techniques and use creative real estate investing to our advantage to be able to get a property under contract for very little money down, less than $5,000, be able to get the seller out of the way because the seller was going through personal problems and was just making the situation worse for not only them, for us as well. Because the longer that they waited, that mortgage was still, accumulating interest fees and late fees and penalties. So that was taking profit out of the deal. So that seller, we had to get that seller out of the way, which we did by closing in January 23rd. And then we were able to wholesale the deal to a new buyer and close with that new buyer February 11th or whatever it was, and make this money in the middle on the side. So not bad, not bad for some creative real estate investing techniques. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some other videos coming up pretty soon. So stay tuned, where we're going to dig in more into the subject too. We're going to dig in more into wholesaling, because I think those are great techniques for new investors to get started with and understand how those techniques work, and be careful with them, because like I said, there's some gotchas that you want to watch out for. But when you know how to use those techniques to your advantage, it could be very, very profitable for you as a real estate investor. So I hope you liked this video. I hope you enjoyed joining us on the journey. If you follow us on Instagram and Facebook for this Largo house, we're finally done with it. So we're super excited that it's gone, and now on to the next one.